we've gotten so far off track, and we have an American empire. That empire has to be taken apart brick by brick, because all it's done is to basically destroy the inner workings of the United States.
So the empire destroys the country.
So recently, Steve Bannon went on Tucker Carlson's podcast talking about the destructive nature of the U.S. empire building, regime change operation, forever wars all the time, my entire lifetime. So I'm with him, take it apart piece by piece. Let's see how he wants us to do that. Let's watch and react. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
A lot of this is taking place in private, and it's one of the great frustrations as an American is you don't know what your government's doing and you have no way to find out. Even when it's done 60 years ago, you don't know. But some of it's taking place totally in public, the Tom Cotton stuff, and it grieves me to say this because I like Tom, and I think he's smart, really smart, actually, and a good guy in a lot of ways. But he's acting on behalf of CIA, not on behalf of the people of Arkansas, obviously. But then there's Lindsey Graham, who's like florid, out in public. Like there's no kind of hiding who Lindsey Graham is, and what is that?
Yeah, the whole Ukraine thing, he and Pompeo, how the weekend before the drone assault takes place, he's in Ukraine saying something's going to happen. He's in France. I mean, if you talk to people over there, it's like he had inside baseball. He was all jacked up. The good things are going to happen. Pompeo's in like Odessa giving a talk. I mean, what is Mike Pompeo? There's a middle of a war over there. We're trying to extract ourselves. What is Mike Pompeo in Odessa giving some, a rally speech, essentially pump these guys up? And he's talking about certain things that could happen or certain positive things to hang in on this war. Exactly what President Trump's counter to. President Trump is trying to have everybody lay down their guns and because right now the British papers report is 1 million Russians dead or wounded. There's 750,000 Ukrainians dead or wounded. I mean, this has been devastating, like World War I type of casualties.
All right, so on this, a lot to say about this. Like, number one, Lindsey Graham being involved in any of the peace delegations during the Trump administration and diplomatic parties is a total nightmare. I think it's actually caused a lot of problems. It doesn't help that Rubio is the head of the State Department, too. But you have Lindsey Graham and Keith Kellogg still playing a role in this administration in Ukraine, and it's absolutely insane. Mike Pompeo, he tried to order the assassination of Julian Assange. So he has no business being involved in anything related to U.S. foreign policy. He tried to convince Trump to keep troops in Syria and other places that Trump wanted to withdraw them from in his first term. He is a devious, evil swamp creature of the highest order. The area where I'll take some exception to Bannon here is that if Trump wants to really get people to lay down their arms, all he has to do is withdraw U.S. aid. He won't do that. He's done that for a few days and then restored it, and since then we basically had status quo Biden policy except for one escalation, that drone strike. So I wish that was the case, but I'm not really seeing it play out in terms of policy yet. And the Israel situation and the Iran situation don't bode well for that, because Iran is a BRICS ally and an ally of Russia. Russia's not going to take too kindly to that, and it's going to jeopardize the peace process there.
President Trump is sitting there going, we need to put the guns down. I need to get people at the table. We need to talk. We'll even buy your dirt. We'll buy your rare earths. We'll put money in, which we oppose. But if President Trump thinks he needs that for a peace deal, we'll support him. What is Mike Pompeo in Odessa jacking these people up? What is Lindsey Graham over there jacking people up about? These questions have to be asked. We have to ask what part of our government is going against the commander-in-chief and what the commander-in-chief is trying to do.
Is it legal for Lindsey to do that?
Well, there's Logan Act. I called for his arrest.
Good.
Right. Absolutely. Or cancel his passport. Do two things. Either don't let him back in the country or arrest him. And I'm adamant about this, and Pompeo also, because
this is great.
I think there are arguments around the Logan Act that they're over there countering what the commander-in-chief's trying to do.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, Trump would have to come out and say that, but instead of saying that, he's actually endorsed Lindsey Graham. And he's dragged people that question the Ukraine policy, like Thomas Massey. So it's not like Trump's coming out there and saying openly, like, you can't be part of these delegations. I don't want you around here. You're undermining our foreign policy objectives in Ukraine. Trump hasn't made that clear whatsoever. Pompeo's not in the administration or part of the government, so I don't think that bears as much if he's there as a private citizen. Obviously, I don't like that. I think he's a total devious villain that wants us dragged into forever wars throughout all corners of the earth. But I don't think Trump's made a big effort to take these deviant neocons out of having influence in world relations.
And they have security clearances too, which I don't have. And you don't have, I assume, a security clearance. Not anymore.
Right.
But why does...
I don't want one right now.
No, I don't either. But
I'm sitting there going, hey, I didn't... Don't blame me.
No.
Don't blame me. I didn't...
But why does Lindsey Graham and why does Mike Pompeo have a security clearance?
Well, I think I got to ask Mike because I'm very disappointed in him. I knew him for years.
Me too.
The guy I know today, the guy I see today is not the guy I knew.
And
I think people have to... I think they ought to come on when they come on TV is they ought to have the... like NASCAR drivers, like whose payroll are they on?
Exactly.
Right. The American people are at least ought to be in a Chiron who they're taking money from.
But what's the deal with Lynn? Let me just say, I've known Lindsey for 25 years, and it's impossible not to like Lindsey Graham. He's one of the most charming, funny. He's just a wonderful person to travel with.
I think it's pretty possible to dislike him. If you're paying attention to the policy, it's totally destructive. He supports every war, embroiling us in Ukraine beyond what we are now, continually touts Zelensky as a hero, wants to shove money into Israel's coffers. He's absolutely devious. And, you know, Tucker, God bless him, man. He looks at the best side of anyone. I can't do it with Lindsey Graham. So if you can do it too, fair enough. I think they were actually mistaken on Pompeo's security clearance. Trump actually revoked it back in like January, I'm pretty sure. So check me on it. Let me know in the comments below if I'm wrong. But I think he actually took away his security clearance back then, and Pompeo's just acting as, you know, a civilian now.
He's the most charming person in the world. I'll just say that because it's just true. I like him. If he was here, I would be having fun with Lindsey Graham. But his effect on the United States is so destructive. I don't understand what that is. What is his motive? You know him well, of course, because you're...
Well, I know. Look, I think, number one, he's very involved in the Pentagon, on Armed Services Committee. The Pentagon the building runs like the building's going to run. I mean, it's $1 trillion. Why, when President Trump says we're going to go to a hemispheric defense, from Greenland to block the Russian submarines, to Alaska, maybe Canada for the Arctic, because that's the new great game of the 21st century.
That seems reasonable.
To the Panama Canal, because they're going to block the Chinese and Russian navies and get the Chinese out of the Caribbean. We'll deal with Venezuela. We'll have the Central Pacific, which has always been kind of our strategic pivot, the 3 island chains. And America's hermetically sealed. You add a Golden Dome or some sort of ballistic missile, America can live in peace, and we can do
greatest.
And we can do expeditionary. Not that we're not engaged in the world. You can do expeditionary forces anywhere you want in the world.
You can't put Chinese infantry.
Well, he wants that in China. I mean, it's so ironic that, you know, the Republicans and the, you know, right-wing populists that are so good on the Ukraine issue don't take that same stance when it comes to Russia and antagonizing Russia by throwing money into the coffers of Taiwan, just like they do the coffers of Ukraine, you know, stepping in on Taiwan's behalf, and all sorts of stuff like that, igniting trade wars. It seems like it's basically emulating the same policy, but just with another superpower, and there's just a total disconnect there.
Structure in St. Croix, which they have a lot of in St. Croix, which we control.
Exactly.
So you can't let the Chinese control your hemisphere. That seems reasonable. And they'll say to us, okay, get out of Japan.
Yeah, that seems reasonable, by the way, but a lot of the populists aren't calling for that. They're calling for, you know, protectionist tariffs to such an extent that Americans can't even trade to get low-priced consumer items that they thrive off and prosper from immeasurably, and, you know, constant aid to Taiwan, the militarization of the Pacific. If you're talking about, you know, controlling your own territories, that's one thing, but that's not what a lot of the right-wingers are calling for.
At which point you say, okay.
I
mean, that seems like logical.
This budget is not $1 trillion going up, right? Because right now it's over $1 trillion. If you add the supplement that's coming in, the reconciliation bill with the NDAA, you're over $1 trillion, and it's only going to keep increasing. This is the way the defense contractors make money. They embed it over there. They kind of run the building right now. You don't see any pushback by armed services. In fact, every district's got huge plants. As you know, our industrial policy that we do have is really around arms manufacturing.
Yes, that's it.
Right? And it's a high margin business, and we want to sell weapons to the entire world. It's that system that's running the country. Remember, the difference between President Trump's first term and his second term is what happened under Biden is a massive concentration of power because they didn't back Neocon or the antitrust people like we have now in President Trump's administration, like Gail Slater, and what's happening to the FTC under Andrew Ferguson, taking big tech to court and trying to break them up. Right now, you have Wall Street, you have big tech, you have big agriculture, you have big pharma, you have the big healthcare industry, you have the defense contractors, you have the concentration of these massive industries that have every lobbyist, every communications expert, all the big law firms on their payroll. If you and I wanted to start today and say, hey, guess what? We want to take on one of the industries. Let's take on big ag. You literally can't get a great law firm to represent you or a great lobbyist because they're all hired by these guys. That concentration.
And they'll set up regulatory hurdles that are insurmountable.
This is the regulatory cap.
I'm living that in something that we're doing on the side. And you just find out that it's like crazy.
That concentration of power.
Oh my God.
Regulatory capture and really regulatory merger. We said when we gave China everything after Tiananmen Square, when we gave them most favored nation status and WTO and access, that the more they get prosperous because they were a backward agricultural country at the time. The more prosperous they get, the more they'll become like a liberal democracy like the United States.
I remember that.
We actually have copied the model of the Chinese Communist Party. They have a handful of state-owned industries, very powerful, merged in with the central government, an authoritarian government. That's what we have, and that's what the promise of President Trump is to break that. The American people don't want it. They hate it. Now, they need the tools to do it, and that's why I think this next couple of 100 days, coming after the 10th anniversary of really President Trump, because what happened?
All right, so a few things. So Bannon says that we gave China everything after Tiananmen, which was in 1989. Well, what he means by that is we opened up deeper trade relations, and it's not that is giving China something. It's actually giving something to China and giving something to the American populace, because trade goes on for the mutual benefit of two parties no matter what. Buyer's remorse notwithstanding. So Americans benefit from Chinese products and Chinese people benefit from American products. You don't have to look at this like a feud between two governments and a trade war. Trade takes place for the mutual benefit of two parties regardless of where they are, where the geographical lines are drawn, etc. So Americans do benefit from that. Americans, some workers don't. Some workers do want more protectionist things and protectionist tariffs and, trade privileges for domestic industry and things like that. That's gotten back to the days of the Whig Party and the Federalists. Hamilton wanted that and Jefferson did not. But at the same time, Americans benefit from that relationship. They're our third biggest trade partner. So the China antagonism is the biggest part of, the MAGA movement that doesn't make that much sense to me. They demonize it in the same way that the establishment liberals demonize Russia. And I would just rather trade with any of them. Trade goes on to benefit individuals, not necessarily governments. Sure, governments can extract part of the trade through tariffs and taxes, but Americans benefit regardless through trade.
At the top of the escalator, Trump was in 7th place because people didn't know if he was serious about running or not.
No, right.
He had just gone to CPAC, I think, 90 days before. In the 2015 CPAC, Trump finished 7th in the poll at 3.5%.
I remember.
Behind all these guys. At the top of the escalator, he's in 7th. That night, they do a flash poll, I think, on CNN. He's first. Why? That talk was in a nomenclature and a vernacular that American people hadn't heard from a politician. About the border, about deportations, about China, about bringing jobs back, about ending the forever wars. And remember, as the campaign went on, he goes to South Carolina.
I'll never forget it.
And in South Carolina, he literally blew up the entire, not just Bush apparatus, kind of Fox and kind of everybody on the right that had been in there. And when he said it, you could hear the audience gasp. And so many commentators came on and said, well, that's the end of him, because
they all said that. Except me, because I was the only one at Fox News who I knew. I was like, yes, thank you for telling the truth, finally.
What they're referring to is Trump said in South Carolina that Bush was a huge mistake. The Iraq war was a huge mistake. It was criminal to get into that war, essentially. And Saddam didn't have weapons of mass destruction, so it was a disaster. This was one of Trump's best moments in his first campaign, for sure. And generally one of his best moments ever. Of course, we know that rhetoric isn't always matched with actions, especially as the U.S. started bombing Iran yesterday and launching a new war contrary to many of Trump's campaign pledges and promises. But at that point, that was great. He effectively ended the Bush dynasty after that, because if you'll remember, this sounds crazy to say it today, but Jeb Bush was considered the front runner in 2015 until he absolutely got decimated on that debate stage. So one of Trump's best moments, some of the best rhetoric ever, but not always followed through.
But everybody around you was that he's finished.
They hated me for agreeing with him. They hated me personally.
And he won in a landslide.
Karl Rove, who was my neighbor and always got along with him. Again, perfectly charming guy, sort of. Very not a good person at all, but smart and, Karl. But after that was the moment I realized it was in that Greenville, South Carolina debate that all that mattered to them was a projection of force abroad. That's it. Everything else was just
because
silly.
They were so shocked he said it and united in the fact that he can't win.
That's when Bill Kristol turned against him, was that night. And if you could look it up, check his Twitter feed. The day before, Kristol was like, Trump's kind of a pig, but he's our pig, and actually we can kind of use him, and maybe we should make peace with Trump. Bill Kristol said that, who I used to work for many years. The day after that Greenville debate, he took the position that he has now, which is, we'll destroy the country to prevent Trump from exercising power. Like, he was a sworn enemy of Donald Trump's after that when he came out against the Iraq War. How weird.
And now you see all these 2016 Never Trumpers line up in complete support of this U.S. strike on Iran. It's almost like those people that oppose Trump are being rewarded because of all their foreign policy preferences being driven down Americans' throats right now on behalf of the Israel lobby. So here's the challenge. I bet you can't do it. Find me a 2016 Never Trumper that didn't support Trump's strike on Iran. But yeah, this is right. Those Never Trumpers are out in full force. There's the Ben Shapiro, the Bill Kristols, so many different ones, French, all sorts of them.
If you killed a child in a DUI, okay, you're drunk, you accidentally run over a child, there's no possibility you could meaningfully advance in American life, because people would say, we've forgiven you, Steve, but you did something that's so horrible.
Irresponsible. Right?
It's just horrible. It was a mistake. Yeah, it was a mistake, but it was horrible. We allowed the architects of the Iraq War, who gravely injured the United States, got all these people killed, Americans killed, to continue to advance. They were never held to account for what they did, ever, at all.
Well, and
they became the head of the World Bank. Like, how did we do that?
The specter of that is what we've faced over the last 72 hours.
Yeah.
This is exactly the same pitch as the Iraq War. Weapons of mass destruction.
Oh, I know.
You have to get it. So they understand one thing. They think the playbook works. This is why we have to stop it now. If we don't stop it now, it's going to work all the time. They think that playbook of lulling the American people to sleep and telling them there's these evil people that have to be taken down, and if they're taken down, everything's going to be fine after that, and that we face an apocalypse if that doesn't happen. They're running the Iraq War playbook over again with almost some of the same players, or at least the proteges, right, in the verticals of who those players were.
But why does institutional conservatism allow it? If Mike Pompeo shows up at the Republican county of dinner in some state, like, he's treated as, I was in a restaurant with him recently. Everyone's like, oh, Mike Pompeo. He's treated as like a legitimate person. No one has ever, the right does not hold its own people accountable on the most basic level.
Why don't we say the right? The Republican.
Yeah, this is so true. Pompeo is one of the worst sewer rat vermin of the deep state, of the swamp, for sure. Now, Bannon pointed out something I thought was so accurate about how the same playbook from the war in Iraq is taking place right now in the war in Iran, which Trump launched a direct strike against Iran. And there's, he's basically flirted with regime change in a Truth Social post now, saying, well, if Iran can't make itself great again, wouldn't a regime change be a good thing, or something like? I'm paraphrasing, but this is just so ridiculous. I thought it was so absurd that I actually had to look up to see if it was real or not, and it really was. So Trump's on board with regime change now, openly. Tucker's right. They actually made Paul Wolfowitz the head of the World Bank after the disastrous, Iraq invasion that he supported, one of the most prominent neocons, big role that he played in the project for the new American century. But Bannon's right. We're seeing the same playbook. The propaganda is even similar. No weapons of mass destruction. They said no nuclear weapons program. So we started off with Israel's doing it by itself. Then we went to, well, these targeted bombings are necessary. Then we went to Trump's bombing Iran to launch the peace or to establish peace. And now we're at regime change is a good thing there, actually. We've completely been co-opted by the neocons in terms of our foreign policy. So I hate to tell Bannon here, it looks like we're never going to stop it now, because we didn't stop it now. This is the neocon policy being emulated, and much of Trump's base is just covering for him. I've seen many people out there saying, oh, with the regime change thing, he's just trolling, or, you know, he's just talking about organic regime change from within. Well, either way, the goalposts just keep shifting to justify whatever Trump's doing, and it's literally the same thing as neocons have always done and Trump's railed against. So that's where we're at.
The party is controlled opposition. Okay, because they've never really put up a fight. Let's go back to the three central tenets of Trumpism: immigration, border and sovereignty, trade, and ending forever wars. The official apparatus of the Republican Party hates all three of those, and doesn't agree with any of them.
Still true?
It's 100%. This is look what happened here in the last 24 hours on the immigration side. All of a sudden, there was they promulgated that because of big agriculture's needs, that we can no longer have raids on farms, raids in hotels, all of it. That had to be countered by President Trump saying, "Hey, there's 20 million illegal aliens. I'm gonna get them all out of here." And then today or this morning, he came out with, "We're gonna triple down the raids in sanctuary cities. Right? I'm gonna get all these guys out of here."
And his self-deportation program. You can turn yourself in. We won't harm you. We'll just deport you. And really what's happened is the several dozen people that have been deported have been so into the most dangerous and brutal Honduras prison because they're critics of Israel, not just because they're here illegally. It's been selective. There's been a selective deportation process that hinges on that, and not your status, not whether you're working or not whether you're taking from welfare or not. That's the criteria they use. So if you wanted to sabotage mass deportations, the Trump administration surely is doing that now by just focusing on critics of Israel, some of which are legally here, like Mahmoud Khalil from Colombia, who dared to criticize Israel. And because of that, they want to deport him and be taken away from his wife and child, which are here.
No, there's huge institutional fight led by Fox News, right? Their biggest is the forever wars. But if you look at the Wall Street Journal, and if you look at Fox News on the trade and bringing jobs back from China, they're very ambivalent about that. They're talking about the cost of living. I mean, they're putting up that, because they're all free traders, which is the way the country got in the first place. They're also quite ambivalent on the immigration and mass deportation.
Okay, I got to step in here. They are not free traders. The neocons are not free traders. Yes, many of them do believe in freer trade than the protectionists, but they're not free traders. That's why there's so many trade barriers, so many regulations that, Bush didn't knock down. There's a lot of institutional capture, and Bannon was right about the regulatory capture, by the way. Big ag, the military industrial complex, big pharma, big food, big telecommunications, all these things are captured, and there's what's called the revolving door process, where executives go in and out of government and make sure that the rules are lenient enough for the big players to basically establish monopolies in their realm and in their sectors of commerce, squeezing out competitors from that. That's not free trade, and this characterized the Bush administration. This is not something that neocons ever wanted to dismantle. There's no such thing as free trade when we have protectionist tariffs on top of progressive income tax, on top of capital gains tax, etc. It's not the case. And if they were free traders, I'd be like, these neocons are awesome on trade. I'd promote them constantly on that issue. They're not.
Mass deportation is just not the criminals. You have to get, President Trump said 20 million. I say it's 10 came in on Biden's watch. They all have to leave. But you're seeing a lot of ambivalence of that, particularly in the Republican Party. They're saying, the Wall Street Journal says, well, no, they add 2%, 1.5% to 2% to GDP, right? Because they buy so much stuff. Number two, they've driven down wages among particularly low-skilled Black and Hispanics. I say this is why we put the coalition together. This is why 39% of Black men are voting for us. This is why South Texas is now MAGA territory, because they understand their wages to be driven down.
You know how to drive them down further? Protectionist tariffs, so that the products they buy cost more and they have less wages. That's how you do it. Also, protectionist tariffs, so their input goods in their businesses that they have to accumulate in order to produce their products costs more. That's a way to drive down their wages. So, yeah, the Republicans aren't exactly standing against, raising their wages through ways that would make it a more free system whatsoever.
So I think the Republican Party hates the basic tenets of President Trump's platform, particularly the one they most hate is ending the forever wars. That's tied to both Wall Street, it's tied to the defense industry, it's also tied to this mentality that we have an American empire. Remember you and I saying, hey, we are actually a republic. We want to go back to being a republic. Like the founders of our country, when they set the Constitution, they looked to Republican Rome. That was their source of things, not the Roman Empire.
No.
What we've done, in fact, they said, I think it was General Washington, don't go over seas looking for monsters to slay.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's totally right about this. Amen. I love that he's bringing this up. He's totally right about what he just said there, and I'll agree with him wholeheartedly. The guy he basically paraphrased is John Quincy Adams saying, when he was boasting about the best merits of America, he said, America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. And that's one of the greatest foreign policy quotes in the world, if you ask me. He was a genius Secretary of State, maybe the best ever. Not a great president, if you ask me, honestly, but a brilliant Secretary of State, a brilliant diplomat, and a non-interventionist. And that's something to be respected. Bannon's right. Empire and forever wars are the biggest cause of the Uniparty and the establishment Republicans. Many of Trump's forces are all in on it now in terms of Iran because of the Israel lobby and the military-industrial complex and Trump's close relationship with Netanyahu, etc. But the establishment is all in on this empire-building strategy. And the establishment Democrats, they're not any more innocent than the Republicans either. They want to shove barrels of money down the throats of Ukrainians no matter how many people it kills, how expensive it is, how little headway they make in the Russian-occupied areas of the Donbass. No matter what, they'll still do that. So Bannon's totally right here. I'm totally on board with what he's saying.
Right. We have enough to do here. Let's do this. And I think that's so far off track, and we have an American empire. That empire has to be taken apart brick by brick because all it's done is to basically destroy the inner workings of the United States and just particularly destroy the very people who are the cannon fodder in these wars, right? And that's why I
destroyed the nation. Drive around the country. Just get in your vehicle and drive. And I don't see how anybody could say things are better now than they were 15 or 20 years ago or 40 years ago. It's a disaster. And so the empire destroys the country.
Indeed, man. The empire destroys the country. Well said, Tucker. Well said, Bannon at the end. Couldn't agree more. And a lot of Americans don't necessarily pay attention to foreign policy or kind of connect the dots as to why that's the case, but I'll make my case right here. With the forever wars, not only do you get increased debt, you get increased taxation to cover it when they choose to tax you, or they use a different form of taxation called inflation, where to finance these wars, they just print endless amounts of paper money, which just doing that devalues the existing amount of money that exists. This is a tried and true phenomenon that economists know. They'll acknowledge it. Even Keynesians will acknowledge this at times. And what this does is it essentially levies a tax that's unlegislated on your wealth. And the Federal Reserve is the engine of this. It's the catalyst of this clandestine method of theft that the federal government uses to finance these things. And it does take some time to catch up. We experienced extreme inflation relative to modern times, in 2021, 2022 especially. And I wonder why. They printed about 45% of the dollars that exist now within the span of a single year. And that was caused by the CARES Act, which Trump pushed and supported and got through Congress. And, good old Thomas Massie opposed. And he got dragged by Trump for that. So that's where we're at. And again, Democrats aren't innocent in all this. They do the same things. So empire building always has long-term ramifications economically on the home front. It also allows the government to justify curtailments and violations of your civil liberties. Freedom of speech restrictions. You'll have freedom of speech zones on campuses and public areas, so you can't exercise that in all areas of public life. That's, supposed to be public areas that the public owns. It's not so much of the time. We got the Patriot Act because of this. We got the DHS. We got the surveillance state brought up during the Bush administration when war fervor was at one of its high points. That's what you get. Empire building's a disaster. Bannon and Tucker are both totally right with that and about that, despite the misgivings I had about some of what Bannon said about trade in China and etc. But Bannon's spot on in terms of foreign policy here. I'm glad he sees it. We'll have to see how much he defends this Iran strike. It seems like he's on the outs with Trump over it. This video, I think, was before the strike that the U.S. had on Iran. It surely was. But now after this, it's going to be interesting to see his response, because he says if we don't stop this now, we're never going to stop it. And I have to agree with him. It looks like a dire situation for us to ever dismantle the military-industrial complex or the empire. You know, it's a daunting task. It seems formidable. You know, there are strategies, though. One of them is defend the guard legislation. This is a movement based upon a set of legislation which, if enacted in states, would prohibit the federal government from using state National Guard forces in an undeclared war, disincentivizing them from not declaring war and making it much harder and requiring much more political capital to send those reserve units into war. That's a great idea, great plan. Take a look at it. Defend the Guard. Props to Dan McAdams, who runs that at Bring Our Troops Home. The guy's a hero. Great organization he runs. But anyways, let me know down below, do you agree with Steve Bannon? What is the best way that the Americans and regular Americans, taxpayers, can help dismantle the empire? Let me know down below. I'd love to see what you guys say about that. And please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and please consider becoming a YouTube member or Patreon patron to support the channel. I'd greatly appreciate that, and bow to you if you do that. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.